Hello ladies, this is an extension of the previous video in which I discussed the tendency of families to get too busy when they're homeschooling or when their children are little, to rush them, to hurry them, and I encouraged everyone to take advantage of the moments because those are teachable moments both for the parents and the children. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about this national and international epidemic of neglecting the grandparents, neglecting brothers and sisters, neglecting the family for the sake of homeschooling. And with permission, I have the statement of one mother who said, every time I call my children and ask, can they come over or can I come over, even during the lunch hour, they say, no, because today we're studying this such and such in homeschool and you can't come. I told that parent, you go, because they should be able to sit in a homeschool class and learn to relate to their grandchildren and see how their children are doing this. Now, I've been a homeschooler, and I feel quite comfortable listening to my daughter and sons talk to their children while they're in their house and teach them and do homeschooling. I can sit through those and enjoy them, and every now and then nod my head and say, yes, that's familiar, and it does my heart good. And no one should put school, any school, public school, homeschool, before people. Education is the great God of our culture, and it just looms larger than life. And to say, oh, we can't come over and see you because we're behind in such and such math, whatever, and we're going to stay home and coach Johnny and all that. Do you know that grandparents aren't going to be on this earth forever? And those of you who have lost your parents through death know this, that you can't go back, that you cannot recall those moments. You cannot ever go back and fill up the deep regret and the sorrow of neglecting them and staying away from them. And so I want to just review a few things that I've been discussing with some of these ladies who my husband says that I must do a video on this because he says it's a national and international plague. We've heard from so many people who've said their daughters or sons married someone who wanted to cast them aside. And so one of the first things that you need to teach your children is not to let a future mate put a wedge between you, your mother, your father, and your brothers and your sisters. This is the first no-no, and that the brothers and sisters should be taught that when one of their siblings marries, that they're also to tell the future mate, I want to be included, and I will not shove you aside, and you don't need to shove me aside. We're all going to be brethren. And I want to read something from Romans 12:10. Be kindly affectioned one to another, in love of the brethren. Be tenderly affectioned to one another, in honor, preferring one another. Now, of course, we know this is talking about the Lord's church, but in a family, you know, God created the family before he created the church, and a family is a miniature sample of the church because the husband loves the wife, and the wife is honoring to her husband, but the husband is not will not arbitrarily decide on rules that are against God's rules. So he or she cannot say, we're not seeing our parents anymore. We're not seeing your parents anymore. And so homeschooling should not get in the way. You can homeschool around anything. And then we also want to address the idea of how spontaneity and accessibility are part of the reasons that we homeschool, because it's more so that you can learn as you go and find the teachable moments. And as I'm just kind of jumping around on these different subjects, I'm really trying to address one thing, and that is to be accessible and to be kind and loving. Be kindly affectioned one to another, in the love of the brethren. Be tenderly affectioned to one another, in honor, preferring one another. Tenderness and kindness. It's not a rigid kind of love. It's tenderness, it's sweetness, it's sincerity. It's not, okay, well, now we're going to love the grandparents. Okay, you kids, line up, everybody give your grandmother a kiss. So that is why it's so important not to be too rigid in homeschooling, because this early training will train them to be future mothers and fathers. So don't let your husband or wife come between your parents, your brothers, your sisters, and that sort of thing. And don't create rigidness in religion or schooling, because it makes you mechanical in everything you do. Remember that activities do not have to be somewhere else with other people. Put quotation marks around those phrases. We are guilty of getting our learning from somewhere else or other people. When I was homeschooling my children, many of the mothers would find out something they wanted to teach their children, and they would take a course in it, and then they would come home and teach their children. That way the children are developing a bonding and a relationship with their mother. And so hard times, let's talk about hard times a little bit. Sometimes homeschoolers get very tense. They get very upset. Times are hard. They're also trying to be frugal. They're learning to discipline their children, and it becomes overwhelming. And so they become snappy. They give short, snappy, sharp replies to their children, to their parents, to people around them. Do you know something? A person of true worth and good character, doesn't matter how hard life is, they've got this inner strength to be, they've got this politeness bred into them. And I'll see people blow up at the slightest things, and yet I see other people who were bred carefully to always be polite no matter what your mood was, and they can handle anything. They don't have to blow up at anybody. And if you are mean and cruel, then later on your conscience is going to bother you. You're going to have to go clear that up. You're going to have a long conversation with someone, and you want to avoid that because that may create more stress. So now I want to go on to this idea of being spontaneous and accessible. Many grandparents are complaining that when they ask their children to come over to have lunch with them, or say that I'm going to drop by your house and see you for a minute, they'll say, "No, Mom, you can't come because today we're studying rocket science, and our children need this, and all this, so you can't come." So they make all these excuses, and education looms larger than life in everyone's home, so that education becomes the great god of our existence. And this is not right. We need to put people first. We need to put parents and grandparents first. Now, if you are a mother or grandmother that's experiencing some of this craziness, remember you're not crazy, and not to overanalyze it, because you can get to saying, well, this and this and this, and maybe I wasn't this and this and this. You know what? There's right and there's wrong, and all you have to do is remember that they're approaching it all wrong if they're not wanting a relationship with their parents and grandparents. And also the running around. You run so much, and you practically live in the car with your children. Well, you might as well put them in public school, because everybody else is teaching your children. You're taking them to this lesson and that lesson and this lesson, and the children are being rushed, just like the poem. Hurry the baby as fast as you can. You get them in the car first thing in the morning, and you run them here and you run them there. That is not healthy for children. I remember when my little boy got a little set of farm animals that were plastic, and he set them up on the windowsill, and for some reason that really engrossed him. He'd set them all up and line them up, and he'd look at them and get them all down. And one day my husband was going to go somewhere, and he said, "Would you like to come with me?" And I said, "Oh, sure." I said to my child, "Come on, we're going." And he said, "Oh," and he was looking at the animals. And while it's good for your children to come quickly when you say come, be careful that you're not interrupting unnecessarily a play that has to work itself out, because this helps the development of their thinking and their brains. And sometimes even we don't have time to catch up to our activities. You drive in the car and you go to the grocery store, and you get there and you think, wow, that was fast, and your mind doesn't have time to catch up sometimes, and this causes all kinds of nervous reactions. So create that childhood at home. Include the grandparents. Don't just include them, but make them part of your life and part of your family, because this is God intended for multi-generational living. Even if you're not living under the same roof, grandparents should be part of the children's life, because that's a personal development